The year is 1997. At that time, the global vodka market was ruled by heritage. Russian and Eastern European brands dominated the shelves. Consumers firmly believed that real vodka could only come from centuries-old traditions, distilled in the icy climates of Russia or Poland. Authenticity meant geography, history meant quality, and premium meant Eastern Europe. Then something unusual happened. A sleek, frosted bottle appeared on high-end shelves in America. Minimalist, elegant, labeled clearly, product of France. France, a country famous for wine, champagne, cognac, luxury fashion, perfume. But vodka? Within just a few short years, that French vodka would rise to become the #1 premium vodka in the United States. It would sell for nearly double the price of established competitors. It would generate over $1 billion in annual sales. And perhaps most shockingly, the company behind it didn't even own a distillery. Today, we're breaking down how this brand rewrote the rules of luxury marketing and how its strategy can completely transform the way you think about branding. But to understand how this happened, we need to rewind. Back to 1976. The Cold War is still shaping global politics. Disco fills dance floors, and in New York City, a liquor importer named Sidney Frank is trying to survive in a brutally competitive industry. For decades, Frank operated on the margins. He imported various European spirits, but he wasn't a giant. He wasn't a legacy powerhouse. He was a small player in a market controlled by massive, historic brands. Then, in the early 1990s, he noticed something interesting. Vodka was exploding in popularity in upscale American bars. Martinis were back. Nightlife culture was booming. Consumers were paying $15 or more for vodka cocktails. And Frank had a realization. Vodka, by definition, is meant to be neutral, clean, almost tasteless. So why were people paying so much for something designed to have minimal flavor? Because they weren't buying vodka. They were buying image. And that insight would change everything. Frank asked a bold question. What if there were true super premium vodka? Not just premium, but positioned above all existing competitors. Something aspirational, something symbolic. And then he made a decision that broke every traditional industry rule. He would make it French. At the time, France had virtually zero vodka heritage. No centuries-old distilling narrative. No cultural association with vodka production. But France did have something far more powerful. Luxury equity. France represented refinement, craftsmanship, high fashion, culinary excellence, prestige. Instead of competing against Russian and Polish vodka brands on tradition, Frank sidestepped the battlefield entirely. He reframed the conversation. This wasn't about heritage. It was about luxury. And here comes the first major marketing lesson. When you can't win on history, win on perception. Rather than arguing that his vodka was more authentic, Frank positioned it as more refined. He leaned into French wheat from the Picardy region. He emphasized meticulous distillation. He spoke about purity and craftsmanship. But more importantly, he engineered the visual experience. The bottle was frosted, suggesting coldness and purity. A clear window revealed the liquid inside, signaling transparency. The name itself sounded elegant and European. Every design choice whispered premium. Then came the most controversial move of all. Pricing. At the time, premium vodkas typically sold between $15 and $17 per bottle. Frank launched his at around $30, nearly double the price. Most entrepreneurs would assume you earn the right to charge more over time. Frank did the opposite. He used price as a signal. In luxury psychology, higher price doesn't just reflect quality. It implies it. Consumers often interpret cost as evidence of superiority, especially in categories where technical differences are subtle. Vodka, chemically speaking, is one of those categories. By launching at a dramatically higher price, the brand immediately separated itself from competitors. It wasn't just another option. It was the option for people who wanted to be seen choosing the best. This was not accidental. It was strategic perception design. And what makes this story even more fascinating is that, at the beginning, The company had almost no traditional advertising budget. No massive TV campaigns, no flashy magazine spreads. Instead, the focus was razor sharp. If they couldn't outspend competitors, they would outposition them. And that's where the real marketing brilliance begins. Creating a premium image is one thing. Making people believe it? That's another level entirely. When this French vodka entered the US market, it didn't have the advertising budget of giants like Smirnoff or Absolut. Those brands were everywhere. Billboards, glossy magazines, massive distribution networks. Trying to compete head-on would have been financial suicide. So instead of buying attention from everyone, the brand focused on being seen by the right people. And this is where the strategy becomes brilliant. Rather than flooding liquor stores nationwide, the company concentrated on ultra-selective distribution. The first priority wasn't retail shelves. It was bars. But not just any bars. They targeted exclusive nightclubs in Miami and New York, celebrity-frequented restaurants, high-end hotel lounges, private members-only clubs, first-class airline cabins. Why? Because alcohol is rarely consumed privately at first introduction. It's ordered in public. And when someone orders a drink in a public space, they're not just choosing a beverage. They're making a statement. Here's the psychological insight. In social environments, people use brands to signal identity. Ordering a specific vodka in a crowded upscale bar subtly communicates taste, wealth, and awareness. And when a bottle sits visibly behind the bar, illuminated under soft lights, it becomes part of the theater of status. An industry executive once explained the strategy simply. They didn't just buy shelf space, they bought bar space. That difference changed everything. This brings us to marketing lesson number 2. Status is created through controlled visibility. Instead of chasing mass exposure, the brand pursued high-status exposure. When influential people in exclusive environments began ordering it, others followed. It wasn't because they had studied the distillation method. It wasn't because they compared mineral content. It was because they saw someone important choose it. And human beings are wired for social proof. If the sophisticated crowd drinks this, it must be superior. That assumption spreads faster than any commercial ever could. But here's the deeper layer. Scarcity. In the early stages, distribution was intentionally limited. You couldn't find it everywhere. That slight friction increased desire. Scarcity creates perceived value. When something feels harder to access, we instinctively assign it higher worth. Luxury brands understand this instinct deeply. Think about how Rolex controls supply, or how Hermes limits access to certain products. The less available something feels, the more desirable it becomes. This vodka applied the same principle, in a category where nobody expected it. But the real genius wasn't just placement. It was narrative control. In industries where product differences are minimal, like vodka, storytelling becomes the battlefield. Blind taste tests consistently show that most consumers struggle to distinguish between premium and mid-tier vodkas. Chemically, they're often incredibly similar. So if taste isn't the deciding factor, what is? Story. While competitors emphasize filtration counts. Distilled 5 times, 7 times, 10 times. This French brand told a different story. It talked about soft winter wheat from northern France. It mentioned limestone filtered water. It highlighted being distilled only once to preserve character, subtly reframing less processing as higher craftsmanship. Notice the shift. Instead of implying harshness that needs to be filtered repeatedly, the story suggested purity from the start. It wasn't about removing flaws. It was about beginning with excellence. That narrative matters, because consumers don't buy chemistry. They buy meaning. And this leads us to marketing lesson number 3. When functional differences are small, emotional differences dominate. The perception of quality became more powerful than measurable quality. In fact, in several blind taste comparisons conducted during that era, the brand didn't always rank first in flavor. Yet when participants were shown labels and pricing beforehand, it was often rated highest in perceived quality. The label changed the experience. This is called expectation bias. When people expect something to be better, they often experience it as better. Luxury branding leverages this psychological phenomenon intentionally. By the late 1990s, annual sales were climbing rapidly. The brand had moved from unknown to aspirational in record time. And still, no massive traditional advertising push. Instead, momentum built organically within high-status circles. Which brings us to the next phase of the strategy. The turning point that transformed a fast-growing premium vodka into an unstoppable cultural symbol. By the late 1990s, the brand had achieved something remarkable. It wasn't just present in elite bars, it was being requested. And that shift from placement to pull is where true brand power begins. But there was still one major challenge. The brand was young. In an industry built on centuries of heritage, youth can be a weakness. Legacy spirits brands lean heavily on history. Old family recipes, historic distilleries, time-honored craftsmanship. This French vodka had none of that. So instead of waiting decades to build heritage, the company engineered credibility. And this brings us to marketing lesson number 4. If you don't have history, borrow authority. In 1998, the brand entered a respected spirits competition hosted by the Beverage Testing Institute. It received a World's Best Tasting Vodka designation. That single award became rocket fuel. From that point forward, every bottle, press mention, distributor pitch, and cocktail menu highlighted the recognition. The medal wasn't just an accolade. It was a shortcut to legitimacy. In consumer psychology, third-party validation is powerful because it removes doubt. When an independent authority confirms quality, consumers feel safer choosing the product, especially at a higher price. Remember, this vodka was nearly double the cost of competitors. That premium required justification. The award provided it. And here's what's fascinating. Most consumers never researched the judging criteria. They didn't analyze the scoring methodology. They saw best tasting, and that was enough. Perception once again outranked technical detail. But the brand didn't stop there. It expanded its credibility through association. Luxury often spreads through proximity. When a product is seen near high-status environments or individuals, some of that status transfers. By the early 2000s, this vodka began appearing organically in nightlife culture, celebrity events, and music scenes. And then something extraordinary happened. It started showing up in hip-hop lyrics. Artists referenced it in songs. Bottles appeared in music videos. It became shorthand for success. What's remarkable is that the brand rarely paid directly for these mentions in the early stages. It didn't need to. It had already positioned itself as aspirational. So when artists wanted to signal wealth or elevation, the brand fit naturally into the narrative. That's when a product crosses a powerful threshold. It stops being consumed and starts being symbolized. This phenomenon became known informally as the gray goose effect. The vodka transcended its category. It wasn't just alcohol. It was a marker of having made it. And this leads us to marketing lesson number 5. The strongest luxury brands are culturally adopted, not aggressively advertised. There's a major difference between a brand pushing itself into culture and culture pulling a brand in. When celebrities voluntarily align with a product, the endorsement feels authentic. It feels chosen. And chosen brands carry more weight than sponsored ones. By the early 2000s, the numbers reflected the strategy's success. Annual case sales soared past 1 million. Profit margins dramatically exceeded industry averages. In some estimates approaching 80%, compared to the industry norm closer to 30%. Why such high margins? Because once perception justifies a premium price, production costs matter far less than positioning. Vodka, from a manufacturing standpoint, is relatively inexpensive to produce compared to its retail price. The real asset wasn't the liquid. It was the brand. Then came the ultimate validation. In 2004, the company was acquired by Bacardi for approximately $2.3 billion. From launch to multi-billion-dollar exit in roughly 7 years. That timeline is extraordinary in the spirits industry, where brands typically take decades to reach that scale. What did they truly build? Not a distillery empire, not proprietary technology. They built perception equity. And here's the deeper insight for entrepreneurs and marketers watching this. In categories where functional differences are minimal, brand perception becomes the primary value driver. The company understood that consumers don't just evaluate products rationally, they evaluate them socially. Does this choice elevate how I'm seen? Does this align with the identity I want to project? If the answer is yes, price becomes secondary, which sets the stage for our final breakdown. So, what can we actually learn from this entire strategy? Because this story isn't really about vodka. It's about how perception is engineered. It's about how value is constructed in the mind of the consumer long before they ever experience the product. Let's break this down into a clear, actionable framework you can apply to your own brand. Whether you're building a startup, a personal brand, or launching a new product into a crowded market. 1. Create a perception gap, not just a product difference. Most businesses try to compete by improving features. Better ingredients, more functionality, faster performance. But in categories where differences are subtle or difficult for consumers to evaluate, perception becomes the battlefield. This French vodka didn't win because it tasted dramatically better. In blind taste comparisons, premium vodkas often perform similarly. It won because it felt superior. The French origin, the elegant packaging, the higher price, the controlled placement, the award recognition. All of these elements created a perception gap between it and competitors. Ask yourself, what assumptions does your market currently hold? How can you reframe the conversation? What perception can you own that competitors aren't emphasizing? Sometimes the opportunity isn't improving the product. It's redefining how the product is judged. 2. Use price as a signal, not just a number. Most entrepreneurs underprice when launching. They think lower price reduces friction. But in premium markets, lower price often reduces perceived value. Luxury consumers don't just evaluate affordability. They evaluate symbolism. When this vodka launched at nearly double the price of established brands, it wasn't arrogance. It was positioning. Higher price signaled exclusivity. It implied superior quality before consumers even tasted it. Behavioral economics supports this idea. In uncertain situations, people often use price as a shortcut to estimate value. So here's the key question. Does your pricing reflect the identity you want your brand to represent? Because price doesn't just determine revenue. It communicates status. 3. Control visibility. Don't chase volume. Instead of flooding the market, the brand focused on selective placement. Exclusive bars, high-end lounges, celebrity environments. The goal wasn't maximum reach. It was maximum influence. This is a powerful shift in thinking. Not everyone needs to see your product. The right people need to see it. When influential consumers adopt a brand, it spreads through social proof. In today's digital world, this principle applies even more strongly. Instead of trying to go viral everywhere, ask, where does my ideal customer pay attention? Who influences them? How can I be visible in high-status environments within my niche? Mass exposure builds awareness. Strategic exposure builds desire. 4. Borrow credibility to compress time. Heritage usually takes decades, but credibility can be accelerated. Winning awards from the Beverage Testing Institute provided instant authority. Later, the acquisition by Bacardi reinforced long-term legitimacy. Third-party validation removes skepticism. It answers the consumer's silent question, why should I trust this? For your brand, credibility might come from industry certifications, expert endorsements, strategic partnerships, media features, influencer adoption. Instead of waiting years to build trust organically, ask, who can lend you trust immediately? Authority shortens the credibility timeline. 5. Build cultural meaning, not just market share. Perhaps the most powerful move wasn't awards or pricing. It was cultural adoption. When artists began referencing the brand in music, it transformed from a beverage into a symbol. It represented success, exclusivity, a rival. The strongest brands don't just sell products, they sell identity. Think about companies like Apple. They don't just sell devices, they sell creativity, innovation, and status. Luxury brands operate on the same principle. So ask yourself, what does choosing your brand say about someone? If your product disappeared tomorrow, what identity would disappear with it? That's where true brand power lives. The bigger truth. Here's the uncomfortable reality. In many markets, superiority is subjective. The difference between average and premium is often perception layered strategically over similarity. This French vodka wasn't radically different in chemical composition. It was radically different in positioning. Sidney Frank didn't just sell a spirit. He sold a feeling, a statement, a signal of belonging to an elevated group. And when perception aligns with aspiration, consumers pay willingly. That's the essence of modern branding. Not manipulation, not deception, but understanding that humans buy emotionally and justify rationally. So the next time you see a luxury product commanding a premium price, ask yourself, is it truly better? Or is it better positioned? Because in today's marketplace, perception isn't just part of value. It is value. And the brands that understand that don't just compete. They redefine the game.